The silver bullet was never meant for her. It was forged in darkness for the heirs of the oldest bloodline in the realm, 2 6-year-old boys who should have been immortal. But when the shot screamed through the rain-slicked night, Lyra Ashford didn't think about prophecies or vampire kings or the fact that the man standing beside those children could end her life with a thought. She just saw 2 small faces that flinched at sudden sounds. She moved, and as her blood mixed with rainwater on the pavement outside a dying diner, she didn't know she had just shattered an ancient cycle and melted the frost around a monarch's heart. The closing shift at the Nightingale Diner was a symphony of exhaustion. The hiss of burnt coffee against hot plates, the clatter of silverware dropped into plastic bins, and the endless buzz of the dying neon sign that spelled, "Open with a dead P." For Lyra Ashford, it was just another Thursday night where her feet screamed inside worn sneakers held together with superglue, and her rent was 4 days late. "Lyra, booth 7 needs a refill," Margie called from behind the counter, her voice sharp with a kind of weariness that came from 30 years of standing in the same spot. "Got it," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the ache spreading from her heels to her spine. She grabbed the chipped coffee pot and moved through the maze of cracked vinyl booths and formica tables that had seen better decades. Before we dive deeper into Lyra's incredible journey, I need to know, are you ready for a story about sacrifice, destiny, and a love that defies every rule? If yes, smash that subscribe button right now, because tomorrow I'm bringing you another epic tale that'll have you on the edge of your seat. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love seeing my story family from all around the world. Now, let's see what happens when the Los realizes this mortal woman might be his only salvation. The diner was a refuge for insomniacs, long-haul truckers, and people with nowhere else to go at 2 in the morning. But tonight, the air had shifted. A strange quiet had settled over the back corner booth, the one by the rain-streaked window that overlooked the empty street. Lyra approached slowly, coffee pot warming her raw hands. The booth was occupied by a man who looked like he'd been carved from marble and dressed in clothes that didn't belong in this part of the city. His coat was tailored, dark as midnight, and even sitting down he radiated the kind of presence that made the fluorescent lights seem dimmer. The Los Morvain. Even Lyra, who avoided gossip and kept her head down, had heard whispers. The papers didn't write about him. They wouldn't dare. But the rumors spoke of old money, older power, and a coldness that could stop a heart. He was beautiful in the way a winter storm was beautiful, dangerous, devastating, absolute. But tonight, the legend was on single-father duty. Sitting across from him were 2 identical boys, no older than 6, Edrin and Kale. They wore matching dark coats that were too formal, too stiff, and their eyes held a guardedness that no child's eyes should carry. "You need to eat something," the Los said, his voice low and measured, as if he were negotiating a treaty rather than dinner. "Not just bread." "I don't like soup." One of the twins, Edrin, she thought, muttered, arms crossed tight against his chest. "It's not poison, Edrin. It's warm and weird," the other boy, Kale, added quietly, pushing the bowl away with one careful finger. The Los exhaled through his nose, a sound caught between frustration and something that might have been helplessness. He clearly knew how to command empires, but had no strategy for negotiating with 6-year-olds about vegetable broth. Lyra stepped forward, filling the water glasses with the practiced silence of someone who had learned not to disturb important people. But then she paused. "Actually," she said softly, and Thalos's head snapped up. His eyes locked onto hers, pale, piercing, ancient, analyzing her with an intensity that should have made her step back. She didn't. If you ask the kitchen to toast some bread, tear it into squares, and float it on top, it's basically croutons. Makes it crunchy instead of weird. The Los stared. The air around the table grew dense, as if the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. Staff at the Nightingale had learned long ago that people like him were not interrupted, not questioned, not helped. "Is that so?" The Los asked, his tone unreadable, his gaze narrowing just slightly. Lyra didn't flinch. She turned to the boys and offered a small smile. And if you eat it, you get night vision. That's how owls see in the dark. Lots of soup. Kale's eyes went wide. Really? I wouldn't lie to a customer, Lyra said gently, and something in the boy's posture softened. Edrin studied her with the seriousness of someone 3 times his age. Then, slowly, he nodded. Okay, we'll try the croutons. Velos looked at the waitress, really looked. He saw the frayed hem of her uniform shirt, the shadows carved beneath her tired eyes, the redness on her hands from scrubbing tables and washing dishes. But he also saw the spine beneath it all. She wasn't afraid of him. She met his gaze and held it. Do it, Velos said, his voice quiet but absolute, though his eyes lingered on her face a moment longer than necessary. For the next hour, Lyra moved through their space like a ghost. She brought extra napkins before they needed them. She refilled drinks without being asked. She treated Velos Morvain not as a creature of legend, but as a tired father trying to get his sons through one meal without a battle. When the check came, Velos placed a matte black card on the worn plastic tray. It caught the light strangely, as if it absorbed it. Thank you, he said. It was brief, formal, but it was more than he'd said to anyone else all night. You're welcome, Mr. Morvain, Lyra replied. The boys were lovely. They are terrors, Velos corrected, though the faintest trace of pride flickered across his face, there and gone, like lightning behind clouds. He stood, buttoning his coat with movements too fluid to be entirely human. Instantly, 2 men in dark suits who'd been seated separately throughout the diner rose as one. Security. They moved toward the door first, scanning the rain-soaked street beyond the glass. Come, boys, Velos said, his hand resting briefly on Kale's shoulder. The twins slid out of the booth, small and careful. Lyra picked up the check folder. Inside, folded neatly, were $500 bills. She gasped, clutching the folder to her chest. It was rented. It was groceries. It was the electric bill she'd been dodging for 2 weeks. She ran toward the door, folder in hand, words of gratitude already forming on her lips. The night air hit her like cold water. Rain misted down in sheets, catching the glow of the one working street lamp. A sleek black car idled at the curb, armored and expensive. Velos was guiding the boys toward it, his back turned as he adjusted Kale's hood against the rain. That's when Lyra saw it. Across the street, barely visible through the rain, a dark sedan sat with its engine running. The rear window cracked open, not much, just enough for the silhouette of a long barrel to emerge, moonlight glinting off metal that seemed to drink the light. Time collapsed into a single, crystalline moment. The security guards were watching the intersection to the left, tracking oncoming headlights. The car was on the right, hidden in shadow. Velos was looking down, murmuring something to Edrin. No one saw. No one but her. Get down. Lyra screamed, and her voice didn't sound like her own. It was raw, desperate, animal. She didn't think so. The check folder fell from her hands, bills scattering into puddles. She didn't run away from danger. She ran toward it, 10 feet between her and the twins. She closed the distance in 4 pounding heartbeats. Velos began to turn at her scream, his hand moving with inhuman speed toward something concealed beneath his coat. But even he was too slow. The boys were exposed, frozen in confusion. The first muzzle flash lit the rain-soaked night like a falling star. Lyra threw herself forward, arms outstretched, and wrapped her body around both boys. She felt their small frames collide with hers as she twisted, putting her back between them and the weapon. They hit the wet pavement hard, Lyra's weight cushioning their fall. Crack, crack, crack. The sounds were sharper than she expected, cutting through rain and air and time itself. Then came the impact. It wasn't pain, not at first. It was force, massive and absolute, punching into her upper back like a hammer wrapped in fire. Her breath left her in a rush. Her vision went white at the edges. Then the world shattered into chaos. Cover. Get to the vehicle. Thalos's voice was thunder and fury, a sound that could have cracked stone. He had his weapon drawn. She glimpsed it in the corner of her dimming vision and was firing controlled bursts at the fleeing sedan, which screeched away into the maze of city streets, trailing smoke. "Papa." Edrin's voice was breaking, high and terrified. The low spun, weapon still raised, his entire body coiled like something about to strike. Then he looked down. Lyra lay sprawled across his children on the blood-slicked pavement. She wasn't moving. Her uniform, pale gray, cheap polyester, was turning dark across the right shoulder blade, the stains spreading like spilled ink.
"Boys.
Are you hurt? Did you get hit?" The Los dropped to his knees beside them, heedless of the water, the blood, the ruin of his expensive clothes. He pulled the twins out from beneath her with shaking hands, hands that had not trembled in 2 centuries. Edrin and Kale were sobbing, clinging to each other, drenched in rain and something darker. But they were whole, breathing.
Alive.
"She's bleeding, Papa," Kale whispered, his small hand reaching toward Lyra's face. "The nice lady is bleeding." "She saved us," Edrin choked out. The Los handed both boys to the larger of his guards, a broad-shouldered man who materialized at his side. "Rocco, get them into the car. Do not stop driving until you reach the fortress."
"Go. Now."
Rocco nodded once, scooping up both children and sprinting toward the idling vehicle. The door slammed. The engine roared. Tail lights vanished into the rain. The Los was alone on the sidewalk with the woman who'd saved his sons. He turned her over carefully, as if she might shatter. Her face was alabaster pale, lips losing color, amber eyes flickering behind heavy lids. Shock. She was crashing hard. He pressed his palm against the wound on her back, high, near the shoulder blade.
"Silver."
He could smell it in her blood, acrid and wrong. The bullet had been meant to kill vampire children. Instead, it had found mortal flesh. "Hey," the Los said, and his voice was gentler than he'd known it could be. "Look at me. What's your name?" "Your Tip," Lyra whispered, her voice thin as paper. Blood bubbled faintly at the corner of her mouth. "Too much, you tipped. Too much." She was delirious.
Dying.
On a rain-soaked street because she'd chosen his children over her own life. "Stay with me," the Los commanded, and for the first time in centuries, he wasn't sure his will would be enough. The sirens started as distant wails, growing louder until they drowned out the rain. Red and blue lights painted the wet pavement in violent streaks, turning the blood pooled beneath Lyra into something that looked black in the strobing chaos. The Los didn't move. His hand remained pressed against her wound, feeling her heartbeat flutter like a dying bird beneath his palm. Around them, shadows scattered, witnesses melting into alleys, the curious retreating behind locked doors. No one wanted to be near when the vampire king blood raged into the night. "Sir." Rocco's voice crackled through the earpiece the Los wore. "Medical team is 2 minutes out. The boys are secure in the fortress." Edrin won't speak. Kale won't stop crying. Thalos's jaw tightened until he thought his teeth might crack. His sons. Traumatized. Again. Because he'd allowed himself one night of normalcy, one meal in a public place, one moment of pretending they were something other than targets. "Send the trauma specialist to them immediately," the Los said, his voice low and lethal. "And find me the bastards who did this." An armored medical van screeched to a halt at the curb, unmarked and black as a hearse. The team that emerged moved with military precision. No questions, no hesitation, no acknowledgement of the human police vehicles that were just now pulling onto the scene. "Gunshot wound, upper posterior thorax, silver round," the Los reported as they loaded Lyra onto a reinforced stretcher. Her eyes had closed. She looked impossibly small, impossibly fragile. "She's mortal. Full trauma protocol." The lead medic, a vampire woman named Sarah with hands steady as stone, nodded once. "We'll take her to the fortress. She won't survive a human hospital with silver poisoning." Silver poisoning. The words confirmed what the Los already knew, and they tasted like ash in his mouth. The bullet hadn't been meant for a human woman. It had been meant for his sons. Keep her alive, the Los said, and it wasn't a request. Yes, my lord. They loaded Lyra into the van, tubes and monitors sprouting from her body like mechanical vines. The Los stepped back, watching the doors slam shut, watching the vehicle disappear into the rain-slicked streets with an escort of 3 armored SUVs. Then he turned to face the approaching police. Lieutenant Marcus Webb was the first to reach him, a middle-aged human with intelligent eyes and enough sense to look nervous. He'd been on the Supernatural Liaison Force for a decade. He knew what the Los Morvain was and, more importantly, what he could do. Mr. Morvain, Webb said carefully, we received reports of shots fired. Are you? The matter is contained. The Los interrupted, his tone arctic. My security team will provide you with a statement. The woman who was injured is receiving private medical care. There will be no charges, no investigation, no media. Webb's expression tightened. Sir, with all due respect, we have protocols. You have discretion. The Los stepped closer, and the temperature around them dropped 10 degrees. This was a targeted attack on my family. It will be handled through appropriate channels. Appropriate channels. The supernatural court. The old laws that predated human governments by millennia. Webb swallowed hard and nodded. He recognized a war when it was being declared, even if he didn't understand the sides. Understood, sir. I'll mark it as resolved pending your office's report. Wise, the Los said, and turned away before the lieutenant could respond. Another vehicle pulled up, this one flying penance that only those who knew the old bloodlines would recognize. The court officials. They moved like sharks through water. Elegant, predatory, inevitable. Lord Vyrek emerged first, tall and silver-haired, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than the Nightingale Diner itself. His expression was arranged into perfect concern, but the Los had known him for 3 centuries. He could see the calculation behind the mask. The Los, Vyrek said, clasping his shoulder with a familiarity that suddenly felt like a violation. Thank the old gods you, and the boys are safe. We heard there was an incident. An assassination attempt, the Los corrected coldly. On my sons. In a public space. Using silver ammunition. Something flickered in Vyrek's eyes. Surprise, perhaps. Or something that looked almost like satisfaction before it vanished. Silver? Then this was clearly aimed at. My children. Yes. We'll convene the council immediately, Vyrek said, his voice grave and proper. A threat to the royal line is a threat to the entire realm. But the Los, this must be handled delicately. We cannot afford to panic in court. If word spreads that the heirs are vulnerable, words will not spread, the Los said, each word sharp as a blade. This incident is sealed. Private matter. You will ensure the council understands that. Of course. Vyrek's smile was gentle, understanding, and it made the Los want to tear his throat out. And the human woman who was caught in the crossfire? She threw herself in front of the bullets. Thalos's voice went quiet, deadly. She saved them. For a moment, genuine surprise crossed Vyrek's face. A mortal?
Extraordinary.
I trust she'll receive appropriate compensation for her sacrifice. The word hung in the air like a curse. Sacrifice. As if Lyra had been a chess piece moved into position, rather than a woman who'd chosen courage over survival. She's receiving the best care the realm can provide, the Los said. And she will be protected. I'm declaring her under royal aegis until the investigation is complete. Vyrek's expression flickered again, disapproval this time, quickly masked. My lord, bringing a mortal into the fortress at a time like this. It is my decision to make. Thalos's eyes flashed, red bleeding into the pale gray. Unless you're questioning my authority. Never, Vyrek said smoothly, bowing his head. I serve at your pleasure as always. I'll begin the investigation immediately. We'll find who dared to threaten your bloodline. He left with his entourage, their expensive shoes clicking against wet pavement, leaving the Los alone in the dissipating chaos. The rain had softened to a drizzle. The police were packing up their vehicles, marking the scene as resolved. The blood on the sidewalk was already washing away, flowing into gutters, disappearing as if it had never existed. But the Los could still feel it on his hands. Lyra's blood.
Warm.
Human. Innocent. His phone buzzed. A message from the Fortress Medical Wing. Patient stable. Critical but responsive. Silver extraction in progress. He should have felt relief. Instead, he felt something he hadn't experienced in 2 centuries, not since the night he'd found his sons abandoned and starving in the ruins of their mother's estate.
Fear.
Because this hadn't been random gang violence or a robbery gone wrong. The ammunition confirmed it, silver, sanctified, designed to kill vampire children. And the timing, the location, the precision of it all, this wasn't an external threat. This came from inside the court. Someone in his own realm, someone with access to royal protocols and security schedules, had just tried to murder his sons. And they'd very nearly succeeded. The Los stood on the empty street, rain running down his face like tears he would never shed, and felt the first crack appear in the iron control he'd maintained for centuries. War was coming. Not from rival clans or ancient enemies. From his own throne room. And the only thing standing between his sons and oblivion was a mortal woman who served burnt coffee and believed in kindness. The Los looked down at his hands, still stained with her blood, and made a silent vow. If she survived, he would give her anything she wanted. And if she died because of him, he would burn the entire realm to ash. Lyra woke to darkness and stone. Not the familiar darkness of her studio apartment with its thin walls and sirens bleeding through from the street. This was deeper, older, a darkness that pressed against her skin like cold water. The air smelled wrong. Ancient parchment, burning herbs, something mineral and sharp that made her teeth ache. She tried to sit up. Pain exploded across her back, white-hot and absolute, forcing a gasp from her throat. Don't move. The voice came from somewhere to her left, female and clinical. The silver is still working its way through your system. Silver. The word pulled memory back in fragments. Rain, children, the crack of gunfire. Lyra's hand flew to her shoulder, finding bandages wrapped so tight she could barely breathe. Where am I? Her voice came out cracked, unfamiliar. The Morvain estate. A woman stepped into view, tall, ageless, with eyes that reflected lamplight like an animal's. You're safe. You're also very, very lucky to be alive. Lyra's vision adjusted slowly. The room was enormous, all vaulted ceilings and tapestries that looked older than countries. Her bed was carved from dark wood that seemed to absorb light. Through an arched window, she could see nothing but fog and the silhouettes of towers that belonged in fairy tales. This wasn't a hospital. This wasn't anywhere she understood. The boys, Lyra said, trying again to sit up. Edrin and Kale, are they? Unharmed. Because of you. The woman, a healer, Lyra realized, noting the silver instruments laid out on a nearby table, regarded her with something that looked like fascination. You took a bullet meant for vampire children. Silver core ammunition, sanctified and lethal. It should have killed you in minutes. But it didn't, Lyra whispered.
No.
The healer's expression turned unsettled. It didn't, and we don't know why. Before Lyra could respond, the heavy door swung open. The Los Morvain filled the doorway like a stormfront, still dressed in the blood-stained clothes from the night before. His eyes found hers immediately, and Lyra felt the temperature drop. Leave us, he said quietly. The healer bowed, actually bowed, and retreated without argument. The Los approached the bed slowly, as if she were something that might bolt or shatter. He expected fear, Lyra realized. He was waiting for her to scream, to recoil, to finally understand what he was. Instead, she just looked confused. Mr. Morvain, Lyra said, her voice steadier now. I don't understand what's happening. Where am I really? Why aren't I in a hospital? Because a hospital would have let you die. Delos stopped at the foot of her bed, his hands gripping the carved wood. Silver poisoning isn't something human doctors can treat. Silver poisoning. Lyra tested the words. The bullet was meant for the boys. Because there... She trailed off, pieces clicking together in her exhausted mind. The pale skin, the cold, the way his security moved like shadows. You're vampires. It should have sounded insane. Instead, it sounded like the only explanation that made sense. Yes. Delos watched her carefully, waiting for the panic. It didn't come. Okay, Lyra said quietly. Then, are the boys seeing someone? For the trauma? They'll need. Delos moved before he could think, crossing to the side of her bed. You nearly died saving them, and your first concern is their emotional well-being? They're 6, Lyra said simply, and they were terrified. Something in Thalos's chest cracked. He reached out, an instinct he didn't understand, and his hand brushed against hers where it rested on the blanket. The contact sent a shock through both of them. Delos froze. He should have pulled back immediately, should have felt the familiar burn of mortal blood against his skin. Vampires and humans didn't touch without consequence. Mortal blood was acid to their kind, a defense mechanism built into the oldest magic. But instead of burning, he felt steady, grounded,
Clear.
as if something that had been screaming inside him for centuries had suddenly gone quiet. Lyra stared at their joined hands, equally stunned. Why does that feel? Impossible, Delos finished. He jerked his hand back, stumbling away from the bed. That's impossible. He was at the door in 3 strides, yanking it open. Sarah, bring me the Codex Antiquus. Now. An hour later, Delos stood in his private study, surrounded by texts so old they crumbled at the edges. Sarah had laid out 3 volumes, their pages covered in languages that predated written history. There, she said, pointing to an illuminated manuscript. The Mortal Anchor Prophecy. Delos read the words he dismissed as legend for 500 years. When night grows too long and the king loses his way, there shall come a mortal anchor, one whose blood does not burn, whose presence steadies the storm. She will save not through power, but through choice. And in saving the heirs, she saves the throne itself. No, Delos said flatly. Prophecies are metaphors.
Poetry.
Not. You touched her blood, Sarah interrupted, something like awe in her voice. And it didn't burn you. That hasn't happened in recorded history. Delos wanted to argue, but he could still feel it, the strange, impossible calm that had flooded through him at the contact. A knock at the study door. One of the fortress guards, looking uncertain. My lord, the young princes are asking for the woman. They won't sleep until they see her. Lyra was dozing when the door opened again. This time, 2 small figures crept inside, careful, quiet, trying not to wake her. Is she sleeping? Kale whispered. I don't know, Edrin replied, equally quiet. Lyra opened her eyes. I'm awake. The twins rushed to her bedside, their faces lighting up with relief so pure it made her chest ache. You're alive, Kale breathed. Papa said you were alive, but I didn't believe him until I saw you. I'm alive, Lyra confirmed gently. Are you two okay? That was scary, wasn't it? Edrin nodded, his young face solemn. You saved us. You didn't have to, but you did. Of course I did, Lyra said. You're just kids. Kale climbed carefully onto the edge of her bed, curling against her uninjured side like he'd known her his whole life. Will you stay? Please? I don't want you to leave. Lyra looked at Edrin, who watched her with ancient eyes in a child's face. You're safe, Edrin said quietly. When you're here, everything feels safe. Delos watched from the doorway, hidden in shadow. His sons, who flinched at sudden movements, who woke screaming from nightmares, who trusted no one, had curled against a mortal woman like she was their salvation.
And perhaps she was.
The prophecy whispered in his mind. The impossible warmth of her touch. the way she'd chosen his children without hesitation. Lyra Ashford might be his salvation, and that terrified him more than any assassin's bullet ever could. The throne room of the Morvain estate had witnessed 5 centuries of blood oaths, executions, and the slow calcification of power into ritual. Its vaulted ceiling disappeared into shadow. Its floors were polished obsidian that reflected the faces of those who walked upon it, forcing them to watch their own treachery. Lord Vyrek stood at the center of the council chamber, silver-haired and elegant, his hands folded behind his back in a posture of patient wisdom. Around him, the inner court assembled, 12 vampires who represented the oldest bloodlines, the wealthiest territories, the cruelest appetites. They all looked to Vyrek. They always had. "Gentlemen, ladies," Vyrek began, his voice smooth as poisoned honey. "We gather in the aftermath of an unprecedented attack on our king's heirs. An attack that should concern us all deeply." Lady Morana, ancient and bitter, leaned forward. "The investigation? Has the king identified the perpetrators?" "Not yet," Vyrek said carefully. "But His Majesty has made an unusual decision in the wake of the incident. He has brought a mortal woman into the fortress under royal aegis." The temperature in the room dropped. Vampires exchanged glances, some curious, most hostile. "A mortal?" Lord Cashin's disgust was palpable. "Inside our walls? After an assassination attempt?" "The woman apparently threw herself in front of the bullets," Vyrek explained, his tone suggesting he found this barely credible. "She took silver ammunition meant for the princes. By all accounts, she should have died immediately." "But she didn't," someone murmured. "No," Vyrek agreed. "She did not. And now she resides in the royal wing, under the king's personal protection. The princes have reportedly formed an attachment to her." Lady Morana's lips curled. "How convenient. A mortal woman survives the impossible, and within days she's embedded in the royal household. This reeks of manipulation." "I'm certain there's a reasonable explanation," Vyrek said mildly, though his eyes gleamed with satisfaction at the spreading paranoia. "Though I confess, I share your concern. The king has been isolated since the queen's death. Vulnerable, perhaps, to those who might exploit his paternal instincts." "You're suggesting the woman is an agent?" Cashin demanded. "I'm suggesting we don't know what she is." Vyrek's voice hardened just enough. "A mortal who survives silver poisoning? Who gains immediate access to the heirs? Who now sleeps under the same roof as our sovereign? The timing is suspicious at best, catastrophic at worst. Has anyone investigated her background?" Morana asked. "I took the liberty." Vyrek produced a slim folder, distributing copies around the table. "Lyra Ashford. I am 26 years old. No family. No education beyond secondary school. She's worked as a waitress for the past 8 years, barely surviving in poverty. No criminal record. No cult affiliations. No connection to any supernatural factions we can identify." Lord Cashin frowned. "Then what's her angle?" "That," Vyrek said quietly, "is what terrifies me. If she's a plant, she's the best we've ever seen. So clean she appears invisible. Or, Morana prompted. Or she's something worse." Vyrek let the words hang in the air. "The old texts speak of mortals who can destabilize our kind. Anchors. Corruption given human form. If her blood doesn't burn our king, if she can influence the heirs, if she represents some prophetic threat we've forgotten." "The mortal anchor myth," Morana breathed. "You can't seriously believe." "I believe the king is changing," Vyrek interrupted. "In 3 days, he has defied protocol, sheltered a mortal, and begun questioning the very laws that have kept this realm stable for centuries. Whether she's an agent or an omen, the result is the same. She destabilizes the crown." The council erupted into an argument. Vyrek let them rage for several minutes before raising his hand. "Peace," he said. "We are not barbarians. We do not act on suspicion alone. But we are also not fools. The law is clear. Any individual who threatens the stability of the throne can be removed by council decree, even if the king himself objects. It is our oldest protection against corruption. You're proposing we invoke the law of necessary severance? Cashin looked stunned. That hasn't been used in 200 years. Because we haven't needed it in 200 years. Virek's expression was grave, sorrowful, and perfectly crafted. But if the king is compromised by prophecy, by manipulation, or simply by grief, then we have a duty to act. For the good of the realm. Lady Morana studied him. And if you're wrong, if the woman is innocent, then she'll be compensated and released, and no harm done. Virek's smile was gentle. But if I'm right and we do nothing, we risk everything our ancestors built. The throne itself could fall. The vote was silent, conducted with subtle gestures and the weight of centuries of fear. It passed. 11-1. In another wing of the fortress, Delos stood before his council liaison, reading the formal notification that had just been delivered. By decree of the inner court, the mortal known as Lyra Ashford is hereby designated a potential threat to the crown. In accordance with the law of necessary severance, she is to be removed from the fortress and placed under court supervision pending full investigation. Failure to comply will be considered defiance of lawful authority. Delos crumpled the parchment in his fist, his eyes bleeding red. Tell Lord Virek, he said, his voice lethal and quiet, that I do not recognize this decree. The woman stays under my protection. And if the court has a problem with that, they can bring it to me directly. The liaison fled. Delos turned to the window, looking out at the fog-shrouded grounds. Somewhere in the fortress, Lyra was sleeping, unaware that she'd just been marked for elimination by the most powerful vampires in the realm. Unaware that by saving his sons, she'd started a war. And Delos realized, with something that felt almost like hope, that he would burn his own court to ash before he let them touch her. The old king was waking up. And he was done feeding their fear. In his study, Lord Virek signed the secondary decree, the one the council would never see. It authorized extreme measures, permanent solutions. The mortal woman would not leave the fortress alive. He'd make certain of that. Wait, did you catch that? Virek, the trusted advisor, is the real villain here. If you're shocked as I am, hit that like button because this story is about to get insane. And listen, if you're loving this tale of courage, betrayal, and unexpected romance, you need to subscribe. I promise you, the stories I bring tomorrow and every day after are just as gripping. Drop a fire in the comments if you think Lyra and Delos can survive what's coming next. Now back to the story. The pain came in waves. Lyra had refused the heavy sedatives the healers offered, afraid of losing herself to the fog of medication. So she felt everything. The burn of healing tissue, the phantom ache where silver had torn through muscle, the exhaustion that made even breathing feel like a battle. But she'd survived worse. Poverty was its own kind of pain, slow and grinding. This, at least, would end. What unsettled her more was the luxury. The room they'd given her was larger than her entire apartment. The bed was carved mahogany with silk sheets that probably cost more than she earned in a year. Servants appeared at intervals, offering elaborate meals on silver platters, asking if she needed anything, treating her like something precious. It made her skin crawl. Please, Lyra said to the young woman who'd brought breakfast, eggs, pastries, fruit arranged like art. You don't have to bow. I'm nobody. The servant looked startled. You saved the princes, miss. That makes you lucky, Lyra interrupted gently. Just someone who is in the right place. What's her name? Elena, miss. Elena. Lyra smiled, though it hurt her healing shoulder. Thank you for the food. It's beautiful. But honestly, if you could just bring me toast and coffee next time, I'd be more comfortable. Elena stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. Just toast. I'm used to being simple. Lyra gestured at the elaborate spread. This feels like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not. After Elena left, looking bewildered, Lyra pushed aside the silk robe they'd given her and pulled on her old waitress uniform, laundered now, the bloodstains mostly gone, but still frayed at the collar and worn at the elbows. It felt like armor, like herself. Delos watched from the doorway, hidden in shadow as he'd been doing too often lately. She'd refused the luxury, refused the pretense. Even now, recovering from a wound that should have killed her, she clung to her own identity like it was the only thing that mattered. He'd ruled for 5 centuries. He'd seen courtiers betray their own children for a better room, a higher title, a seat closer to power. And this mortal woman couldn't even accept breakfast without feeling guilty. "You're watching her again," Sarah said quietly, appearing at his shoulder. "The guards are starting to notice." "Let them notice," Delos said. "My lord," the court decree, "will be ignored." Thalos's tone left no room for argument. "She stays. Under my protection. Anyone who objects can answer me personally." Sarah was silent for a moment. Then, "She's changing you." "She's changing nothing," Delos said, but the lie tasted bitter even as he spoke it. That afternoon, Delos found Lyra in the courtyard gardens, sitting on a stone bench with the twins. She'd convinced someone to let her outside, probably by being polite until they couldn't refuse, and now she was teaching Edrin and Kale how to fold paper into birds. "Like this," she said, her hands moving slowly so they could follow. Fold it in half, then unfold.
"See?
Now, the corners come down to meet the center line." Kale's tongue stuck out in concentration. "Mine looks weird." "Weird is good. Weird is character." Lyra helped him adjust the folds.
There.
"Now you've got a crane." In some cultures, they're supposed to be lucky. "Did you know that before you saved us?" Edrin asked, his voice serious. "That you'd be lucky?" Lyra's hands stilled.
"No, sweetheart."
"I didn't think about luck at all. I just saw you too and knew I had to help." "Why?" Kale asked. "Papa says most people only help if they get something back." The question cut deeper than the child knew. Delos stepped closer, still unseen, waiting for her answer. "Because you're worth helping," Lyra said simply. "You don't have to earn being protected. You just have to exist." Edrin studied her. "But you're hurt. You could have died. That's not fair." "Fairness isn't always the point," Lyra said gently. "Sometimes you do things because they're right, not because they're fair." Delos felt something crack inside his chest, something that had been frozen for so long he'd forgotten it was there. That night, Delos found himself standing outside Lyra's door. He told himself he was checking on her security, making sure the guards were positioned correctly, ensuring the court hadn't tried anything. The truth was simpler and more terrifying. He wanted to see her. He knocked. Lyra's voice called out softly, "Come in." She was sitting by the window, her silhouette backlit by moonlight. She'd been reading one of the books from the room's collection, a volume of poetry, he noted. Not the history or philosophy texts the library was known for. Just simple verses about ordinary things. "Mr. Morvain," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "Is something wrong? You should call me Delos." The words came out rougher than he intended.
"And no.
Nothing is wrong. I wanted to check on your recovery." "I'm fine," Lyra said automatically. Then, more honestly, "I'm healing. It hurts, but I've had worse." "Worse than a silver bullet?" She smiled faintly. "Eviction notice when you're 3 days from homelessness. That's a different kind of bullet." Delos moved closer, drawn by something he didn't understand. "You could have had anything. A life of comfort, power, influence. Why did you stay in that diner?" "Because people needed coffee at 3 in the morning," Lyra said, as if the answer was obvious. "And because I'm good at remembering how people take their orders. Everyone wants to be remembered, you know? Even strangers in a diner." "Is that what you think I am?" Delos asked quietly. "A stranger you remembered?" Lyra finally looked at him directly. "I think you're a father who loves his sons and doesn't know how to show it. I think you're terrified something will take them from you. I think you've forgotten what it feels like to be seen as anything other than dangerous. The accuracy of it stole his breath. You don't know what I've done. The things I've ordered. The darkness I've... I don't care what you've done, Lyra interrupted gently. I care what you do now. The Los stared at her, this mortal woman with her frayed uniform and her impossible kindness, and realized with perfect clarity that everything had changed. The court wanted her removed because she was dangerous. They were right, but not in the way they thought. She was dangerous because she made him want to be something other than a monster. She was dangerous because when he looked at her, he didn't see a subject or a tool or a prophecy. He saw salvation. And he wanted it with a desperation that terrified him. The court has issued a decree, the Los said quietly. They want you gone. They see you as a threat. Lyra's face paled. Then maybe I should.
No.
The word came out fierce, possessive. You're staying. Under my protection. And anyone who tries to remove you will answer to me. Not as a king issuing a decree. As a man who'd finally found something worth protecting beyond duty and bloodline. As a man who was beginning to understand that kindness wasn't weakness. It was the only thing strong enough to unmake 5 centuries of darkness. The evidence arrived at dawn, delivered by a guard who looked like he'd seen his own death. The Los stood in his private study, examining the documents spread across his desk, shipping manifests, coded correspondence, payment records traced through 3 shell companies. All of it pointed to one name, signed in elegant script at the bottom of a requisition order for sanctified silver ammunition. Lord Vyrek, chief advisor to the crown. How long have you known? The Los asked Rocco, who stood rigid by the door. 2 days, my lord. I wanted to be certain before. 2 days. Thalos's voice was lethal calm. My sons were nearly murdered by my own advisor, and you waited. The evidence had to be irrefutable, Rocco said. Vyrek has served the crown for 3 centuries. An accusation without proof would have fractured the court beyond repair. The Los looked at the signature again. 300 years of loyalty, of counsel, of standing at his right hand through wars and succession crises. All of it a lie building toward this moment. He wanted the twins dead, the Los said quietly. So he could position himself as regent, as king in all but name. Yes, my lord. And now that they survived, now that Lyra, Thalos's jaw tightened. He'll try again. He has to. The woman is proof that the prophecy might be real, that change is possible. He can't allow that. As if summoned by the thought, an explosion shattered the morning silence. Lyra woke to the sound of screaming. She bolted upright, her healing shoulder shrieking in protest. Smoke was pouring under her door, acrid and thick. Through the window, she could see flames licking up the eastern tower. Her door crashed open. Not a servant. An armed guard she didn't recognize, his face covered, a blade gleaming in his hand. Lyra rolled off the bed as he lunged, the knife embedding in the mattress, where her throat had been seconds before. She grabbed the heavy candlestick from the nightstand and swung blindly, connecting with his temple.
He staggered. She ran.
The corridor was chaos, guards fighting guards, loyalties fracturing in real time. Lyra pressed herself against the wall, trying to understand what was happening. This wasn't an outside attack. This was the fortress eating itself alive. There, a shout from behind her. 2 more masked figures moving fast. Lyra ran faster, her bare feet slapping against cold stone. She took a corner blind and collided with something solid. The Los. He caught her by the shoulders, his eyes wild, scanning her for injuries. Are you hurt? Someone tried in my room. There was a knife. I know. The Los pulled her behind him as the 2 pursuers rounded the corner. He moved with inhuman speed, disarming the first with a motion too fast to follow, snapping the second's neck before the body hit the ground. The violence was efficient, brutal, and over in seconds. Stay close to me, the Los commanded. The fortress is compromised. Vyrek has activated sleeper agents throughout the guard. Vyrek. Lyra's mind raced. The silver-haired man? Your advisor? My traitor. The Los guided her through the smoke-filled corridors, moving with the certainty of someone who'd memorized every stone. He ordered the hit on the twins. He's been planning a coup for years. They burst into the throne room. The twins were there, guarded by Rocco and 4 loyalists. Edrin and Kale ran to Lyra immediately, wrapping themselves around her legs. You're okay, Kale sobbed. They said someone was trying to hurt you. I'm okay, Lyra promised, stroking his hair with shaking hands. I'm right here. How touching, a voice echoed through the vaulted space. Lord Virex stepped from the shadows, flanked by a dozen armed vampires. He looked immaculate, not a hair out of place, his smile gentle and poisonous. The Los, he said warmly. Must we do this in front of the children? You tried to murder them, the Los growled, moving between Virek and his sons. You tried to murder her. I tried to save the realm. Virek's expression turned sorrowful. You've been compromised, old friend. This mortal has clouded your judgment. The court recognizes what you cannot. She's a destabilizing force. Corruption. She's the only reason my sons are alive. And that's precisely the problem. Virek gestured to the woman. Look at her. Mortal. Powerless. Ordinary. Yet she survives Silver. She touches you without burning. She's inserted herself into the heart of the royal family in a matter of days. Tell me, the Los, doesn't that terrify you? Doesn't it suggest manipulation? Prophecy? Forces beyond our control. It suggests courage, the Los said coldly. Something you've forgotten. I haven't forgotten anything. I remember what we built, a realm ruled by strength, by fear, by the old ways that kept us apex predators for millennia. Virek's smile faded. And I remember what happens when kings grow soft. They fall. Their kingdoms fall with them. Then watch me rebuild, the Los said. Without you. Virek sighed. I was afraid you'd say that. He raised his hand. Throughout the fortress, horns began to blow, the ancient call to arms. The sound of armies mobilizing, of factions choosing sides, of civil war igniting in the passages and halls. You can't win this, Virek said calmly. Half the court supports me. The other half fears the prophecy too much to support you. You're alone, the Los. All because you couldn't let go of one insignificant mortal. Lyra stepped forward before the Los could stop her. Her voice was steady despite her fear. I heard you, she said. In the corridor 3 days ago, you were talking to someone. You said the king was weakening, that the mortal anchor couldn't be allowed to bond with the heirs. You said if she lived, everything would change. Virek's smile turned genuinely pleased. You have good ears for a dying woman. I'm not dying, Lyra said. And I'm not leaving. Because those boys deserve better than a kingdom ruled by fear. And she glanced at the Los, deserves a chance to be more than the monster you want him to be. How noble, Virek said. And how pointless. He drew a blade, ancient, etched with runes that seemed to drink the light. The fortress is sealed. No one leaves until this is settled. You can surrender the woman now, and perhaps spare some lives. Or you can watch everyone you care about burn. Thalos's eyes bled red, his fangs extending. Then let it burn. Virek's army surged forward. Thalos's loyalists met them with steel and shadow. The throne room erupted into violence. And Lyra, standing in the center of it all with 2 terrified children clinging to her, realized with perfect clarity that she'd become the fulcrum of a war she didn't understand. But she wasn't running. Not from this. Not from them. The fortress was sealed with a sound like thunder. War had come to the House of Morvain, and Salvation wore a waitress uniform. The fortress became a labyrinth of fire and screaming metal. The Los fought like something unleashed from the deepest circles of hell. He moved through Virek soldiers with centuries of martial perfection, each strike precise, each kill necessary, no wasted motion. Blood painted the obsidian floors. Bodies fell and didn't rise. This was the vampire king the legend spoke of. the monarch who had conquered territories with nothing but will and violence. The creature who had forgotten mercy so completely that even his own court feared him. And he was magnificent and terrible in equal measure. Fall back to the royal wing. Rocco roared, cutting down two attackers with a single sweep of his blade. Protect the heirs. Lyra held the twins close as the loyalist guards formed a protective circle, retreating step by step through smoke-filled corridors. Around them, the fortress tore itself apart, vampire against vampire, ancient allegiances shattering like glass. The safe room, one guard urged. We need to get them to. No, Lyra said. Everyone turned to stare at her. No safe rooms, Lyra repeated, her voice stronger now. I've worked enough late shifts to know, when you corner yourself, you're trapped. We need options. Movement. What about the servant passages? The guard blinked. Those aren't on any official maps.
Exactly.
That's why we use them. Lyra had noticed the narrow doors during her recovery, had seen servants appearing and disappearing like ghosts. The architecture of invisible labor. Can they get us to the lower levels? Yes, but then that's where we go. Lyra looked at Edrin and Kale, who watched her with absolute trust despite the chaos. Can you two be brave for me? We're always brave, Edrin said, though his hand trembled in hers. I know you are. They moved through the hidden passages, rough stone, barely wide enough for adults, lit only by Lyra's borrowed torch. Behind them, the sounds of battle grew distant, but never disappeared entirely. Ahead, darkness and uncertainty. Why are we going down? Kale whispered. Papa said always go up when there's danger. Because Virek's forces are pushing up, Lyra explained, thinking like a waitress during a dinner rush. Anticipate flow, avoid collisions, always have an exit. They expect you to run to the towers, to the obvious defensive positions. So we go where they're not looking. They emerged in the lower archives, a vast chamber of stone and ancient knowledge that smelled of parchment and time. Servants huddled there, terrified and forgotten. You. Lyra pointed to an older woman she recognized. Elena, right? How many people are down here? 37, miss. Elena said, her voice shaking. We didn't know where to go. The guards said to shelter in place, but the smoke is rising. You're safe here for now. Lyra's mind raced. But we need defenses. Are there wards? Protections built into the fortress that can be activated. The old wards, a frail voice spoke up. An ancient vampire librarian stepped forward, his eyes cloudy with age. They haven't been used in 2 centuries. The activation sigils are in the sub-basement, but only those of royal blood can. The twins have royal blood, Lyra said. Show us. The sub-basement was older than the fortress itself, carved from living rock, covered in symbols that seemed to writhe in the torchlight. The twins stared at the massive stone door, its surface etched with geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. I don't know how, Edrin said quietly. Yes, you do, Lyra said, kneeling beside them. You've watched your father work. You've seen how he commands. This is just another kind of command. What if we do it wrong? Kale asked. Then we figure it out and try again. Lyra smiled and meant it. That's what courage is. Not knowing but doing anyway. Edrin approached the door first, placing his small hand on the central sigil. Nothing happened. Then Kale joined him, their hands side by side. The symbols flared to life, blue-white light racing through carved channels, spreading like lightning through stone. The fortress groaned, ancient mechanisms waking after centuries of sleep. Throughout the building, protective barriers snapped into place, cutting off entire wings, trapping Virek's forces in isolated pockets. You did it, Lyra breathed. We did it, Edrin corrected, looking at her with something like wonder. You believed we could. An explosion shook the chamber. Dust rained from the ceiling. Virek's forces had reached the archives. Get the civilians through the eastern passage, Lyra commanded, sounding more certain than she felt. "Elena, you lead them. Take the twins." "No," both boys said simultaneously. "We're staying with you," Kale insisted. "Absolutely not." The archive door exploded inward. 6 of Virek's soldiers poured through, weapons drawn, eyes wild with bloodlust. Lyra grabbed the nearest thing, a bronze candelabra, heavy as a weapon, and stepped in front of the children. Her hands shook, but she held her ground. "You want them?" she said. "You go through me." The lead soldier laughed. "You're mortal. You're nothing." "I'm the woman who took a bullet for them," Lyra said. "I'm the woman who survived your silver. And I'm the woman who's done running." She swung the candelabra with everything she had. It connected with a soldier's skull, sending him staggering. Not a killing blow. She didn't have vampire strength, but enough to buy seconds. Enough for the Los to appear. He tore through the remaining soldiers like they were made of paper. The violence was over before Lyra's heart completed its next terrified beat. 5 bodies. 5 seconds. The Los turned to her, blood-splattered and breathing hard. "I told you to hide." "I don't hide anymore," Lyra said. "And neither should you." Something passed between them. Recognition, respect, the strange alchemy of 2 people discovering each other in the midst of war. "The wards are active," Edrin reported. "Virek's forces are trapped in the western wing." "But not Virek himself," Rocco said grimly, appearing in the doorway. "He's advancing on the throne room. He's calling for a formal challenge. Trial by combat. You against him, with the crown itself as the prize." Thalos' expression went cold. "Then he'll get his challenge." "Papa, don't," Kale pleaded. "He's trying to trap you." "I know." The Los knelt, meeting his son's eyes. "But some traps you walk into because it's the only way forward. Stay with Lyra. Trust her. She'll keep you safe." He stood, looked at Lyra one last time, and in his eyes she saw something that looked like goodbye. Then he was gone, moving toward the throne room where his betrayer waited. Lyra held the twins close as the fortress burned and sealed itself for the final confrontation. The night was eating itself alive, and somewhere in the smoke and shadow, a traitor smiled. "I can barely breathe. Can the Los and Lyra survive this? Is love really strong enough to defeat centuries of darkness?" If you're as invested in this story as I am, make sure you're subscribed because you do not want to miss tomorrow's story. I guarantee it'll give you the same butterflies and heartache. Comment Team Elwire if you believe in her strength, or Team Thalos if you think the Vampire King is the real hero here. Let's finish this together. The throne room had become an arena. Bodies of the fallen lined the walls, both sides. No victor yet declared. The obsidian floor reflected firelight from the burning tapestries, turning the ancient chamber into a vision of hell. At the center stood 2 figures, circling each other like wolves. The Los Morvain, Vampire King, covered in blood that wasn't his own. Lord Virek, architect of betrayal, pristine and smiling. "It didn't have to be this way," Virek said, his voice carrying the false warmth of centuries of practiced diplomacy. "I served you faithfully, the Los. I built this court into something magnificent. All I asked was that you remain what you were, strong, feared, absolute. You asked me to remain a monster," the Los corrected, his voice like gravel and winter. "You needed me hollow so you could fill the void with your own ambition. I needed you effectively." Virek's mask slipped slightly. "Do you know what happens to kings who grow soft? Who let mortal sentiment corrupt their judgment? They fall. Their kingdoms crumble. Compassion is a luxury we cannot afford." "Then perhaps we've been affording the wrong things." Virek lunged. The combat was brutal and ancient. No modern weapons, just fangs and claws and centuries of accumulated violence. They moved too fast for mortal eyes to follow, destroying stone pillars, shattering the throne itself in their fury. The Los was stronger, but Virek was desperate, and desperation made him vicious. A blade appeared in Virek's hand, the same ruined weapon from before, and he drove it toward Thalos' heart. The Los caught his wrist, but the blade's tip pressed against his chest, drawing blood that hissed and smoked. Sanctified silver, Vyrek hissed. Forged to kill kings. How does it feel, the Los? To know you're dying for a mortal who'll be dust in 50 years. It feels, the Los said through gritted teeth, like the first honest thing I've done in centuries. The doors burst open. Lyra stood in the entrance, the twins beside her, Rocco, and the remaining loyalists behind them. She looked like she'd run through fire, and perhaps she had. Her uniform was torn, her face streaked with soot, but her eyes were clear. "Stop," she shouted. Both combatants froze, shock overriding centuries of battle instinct. "You," Vyrek breathed, genuine surprise in his voice. "You should be dead. I sent my best." "They failed," Lyra said simply. She walked forward, stepping over rubble and bodies, until she stood between the two vampires. A mortal woman, weaponless, placing herself between kings. "Lyra, get back." The Los started.
No.
Her voice was steady. "You're fighting about me. The least I can do is be present for the conversation." She turned to Vyrek, and the old vampire actually took a step back from the moral clarity in her gaze. "You tried to kill children," Lyra said. "Not enemies. Not threats. Children who flinch at loud sounds and have nightmares and just want their father to smile at them. You tried to murder them because they represented change, and change terrifies you more than any weapon ever could. They represented weakness," Vyrek spat. "A king who coddles his heirs, who allows mortals into his house, who questions the very foundation of our power." "What power?" Lyra interrupted. "The power to make everyone afraid? The power to rule over people who hate you? What exactly have you built here, Lord Vyrek? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like a prison where the jailer is just as trapped as the inmates." "You know nothing of our world. I know broken children when I see them," Lyra said, her voice rising. "I know what fear does to people. I served it for years. Fear of eviction, fear of hunger, fear of tomorrow. And you know what I learned? Fear doesn't make you strong. It makes you small. It makes you cruel. It makes you so busy protecting what you have that you forget why you wanted it in the first place." She turned to the Los, and her expression softened. "You asked me once why I stayed at the diner. I stayed because people needed coffee, yes, but also because I needed to believe that small kindnesses mattered, that being seen mattered, that we don't have to be powerful to be important." Tears tracked through the soot on her face. "These boys see you, the Los. Not as a king, not as a monster, as their father. And they're terrified you're going to die before you see yourself the way they do, as someone worth saving." The throne room was silent except for the crackle of dying flames. Then Edrin stepped forward. Small, solemn, terrified but moving anyway. "Papa," he said quietly, "we don't want a kingdom built on fear. We want you." Kale joined his brother. "We want a home where we don't have to be afraid. Where you don't have to be afraid." "Children don't make policy," Vyrek started. "These children," Lyra said, her voice sharp as any blade, "are the future you're trying to murder. And I'm done letting old men sacrifice the young to protect their own comfort." She looked at Vyrek with something that wasn't quite pity. "You've spent centuries building a system that requires cruelty to function. That demands everyone be as hollow as you are. And the moment someone offered a different path, you tried to kill it. Not because it was wrong, because it was possible. And possibility is the most dangerous thing to someone who's invested everything in impossibility." Vyrek's face twisted with rage. He raised the silver blade, and the Los caught his wrist, twisted, and disarmed him in a single fluid motion. "By the ancient laws," the Los said, his voice resonating with centuries of authority, "you are bound, Lord Vyrek. You attempted regicide. You orchestrated the attempted murder of royal heirs. You violated every oath you swore to this crown. You can't." Vyrek struggled against Thalos's grip. "I can. And I do." The Los nodded to Rocco. Bind him. He'll face formal trial. Let the court decide his fate. As guards moved to restrain Virek, the old vampire looked at Lyra with something like comprehension. She's already changed you, he said. The prophecy was real. And you've doomed us all. Perhaps, the Los said. Or perhaps we've been doomed for centuries, and she's the only reason we might survive. They dragged Virek away, still raging, still certain of his righteousness. The throne room fell silent. The Los looked at Lyra, this mortal woman who'd faced down armies and ideologies with nothing but conviction, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. For 500 years, he'd ruled through fear because fear was all he'd known. But standing in the ruins of his broken court, his sons at his side, and a waitress who believed in kindness before him, the Los Morvain realized something profound. Darkness had never been his strength. It had been his cage. And she'd just shown him the door. 3 weeks after the siege, the throne room had been rebuilt. Not restored, rebuilt. The old obsidian floors remained, but now light flooded through new windows carved into ancient stone. The throne itself had been redesigned, still commanding, but no longer a monument to isolation. 2 smaller seats flanked it now, size for children who would one day rule. The court assembled in silence, nobles and advisors who'd survived the purge standing in careful formations. Some bore wounds from the fighting. All bore the weight of uncertainty. The Los stood before them, no longer the hollow king who'd ruled through fear. He looked different now, still powerful, still dangerous, but somehow more present, as if he'd remembered how to inhabit his own skin. "We gather," he began, his voice resonating through the chamber, "to acknowledge what we have become, and to choose what we will be." He gestured, and guards brought forward the ancient law codex, a tome so old its pages were bound in materials that predated parchment. For 5 centuries, this court has operated under laws designed for a different age. Laws that made fear the foundation of order. Laws that demanded cruelty as proof of strength. Thalos's gaze swept the assembly. Lord Virek believed those laws were sacred. Unchangeable. He was willing to murder children to preserve them. A ripple of discomfort passed through the gathered nobles. He was wrong. The Los placed his hand on the codex. By the authority vested in me as sovereign, I abolish the law of necessary severance. I abolish the edict of blood supremacy. I abolish every statute that treats compassion as weakness and mercy as treason. Lady Morana stepped forward, her ancient face uncertain. "My lord, without those structures, what prevents chaos? What maintains order?" "Perhaps," a new voice said, "we try maintaining order through something other than terror." Lyra emerged from the side chamber, and the court's attention snapped to her like moths to flame. She wore simple clothes, not the elaborate gowns the servants had offered, but a dress of deep blue that was elegant without being ostentatious. She looked like herself. Just more. She approached the Los, and the court held its collective breath. "This woman," the Los said, and his voice carried a weight that had nothing to do with authority and everything to do with truth, "saved my sons when she had every reason to look away. She challenged me when I needed to be challenged. She stood between kingdoms and asked the only question that mattered. What are we protecting, and is it worth protecting?" He turned to face Lyra directly. The ancient text spoke of a mortal anchor, someone who could tether a sovereign to his humanity without diminishing his power. I thought it was a metaphor, poetry from a gentler age. "And now?" Lyra asked softly. "Now I know it was prophecy." The Los took her hand, that same impossible contact that should have burned and didn't. "You are my anchor, Lyra Ashford. Not because fate decreed it, but because you chose it. Every day since that night, you've chosen courage over safety. Choose these boys over your own well-being. Chosen to believe that even monsters can change." He dropped to one knee, and the court gasped. "I offer you not a reward, but a choice," the Los said. "Stand with me. Not as subject, not as decoration, but as consort, as a partner, as the voice that reminds this kingdom what we're meant to protect. Help me build something better than what we've been. Lyra looked at him, this ancient king kneeling before a waitress, and felt the weight of the moment.
I'm still mortal, she said.
I'm still nobody important. You're the most important person in this room, Edrin said, as he and Kale stepped forward to flank their father. You're the reason we're not afraid anymore. You're the reason he remembers how to smile, Kale added. Lyra's eyes stung. She looked at the assembled court, powerful vampires who'd ruled through darkness for centuries, and saw the uncertainty there, the fear of change, but also, beneath it, something fragile and new. Hope. I accept, Lyra said, but not because I think I can fix everything. I accept because you're trying, and trying matters. She helped Delos to his feet, and the gesture was not lost on the court, a mortal helping a king rise. There is one more matter, Delos said. He turned to his sons. Edrin.
Kale.
Come forward. The twins approached, small but no longer quite as fragile as they'd been. War had aged them, but not broken them. Delos placed a hand on each boy's head. I crown you not as heirs of darkness, but as heirs of balance. You will rule one day not through fear, but through the strength that comes from understanding both night and dawn. From knowing when to show mercy and when to show steel. From remembering that power without purpose is just cruelty with a crown. He produced 2 circlets, simple, elegant, inscribed with symbols that represented both ancient bloodlines and new covenants. Do you accept this responsibility? Delos asked formally. We do, the twins said in unison. As Delos placed the circlets on their heads, something shifted in the throne room. Not magic exactly, but a sense of possibility opening where before there had been only inevitability. The court began to applaud, hesitant at first, then building. Not everyone was convinced. Not everyone would accept this new order. But enough did. Enough believed that change was possible. Enough remembered what hope felt like. Later, after the ceremonies and the oath-swearing and the careful political negotiations, Lyra stood on the fortress balcony, watching the sun rise. Delos found her there, the twins already returned to their rooms, the court finally dismissed. Regrets? He asked. Hundreds, Lyra admitted. But none about this. She gestured at the dawn, pink and gold spreading across the horizon, touching the ancient stone towers with light they hadn't seen in years. Below, in the courtyards, servants moved freely. Guards stood watch without fear. The fortress was learning to breathe again. I never understood why they called it dawn until now, Delos said quietly. I've seen thousands of them, but they were always just the end of night. The time to retreat and hide. And now it feels like a beginning. Lyra took his hand, and the contact steadied them both. The court won't change overnight. Some of them still see me as an intruder, a threat. Let them, Delos said. We're not building this kingdom for the ones who cling to darkness. We're building it for everyone who's willing to step into the light. He pulled her closer, and she fit against him like she'd been designed for that exact space.
Thank you, he said.
For taking that bullet. For staying. For believing I could be more than what I was. Thank you for proving me right, Lyra replied. As the sun climbed higher, painting the world in colors that had seemed impossible weeks before, the fortress settled into something it had never been, a home. Not built on fear. Not maintained through cruelty. But held together by the simple, revolutionary idea that kindness was not weakness. That darkness need not be eternal. That even the longest night could learn to hold the dawn. And in that moment, standing between a vampire king and the rising sun, Lyra Ashford, waitress, survivor, anchor, and now consort, understood why she'd taken that bullet. Not because fate demanded it, but because some things were worth saving. And love, in all its forms, was chief among them. And that is how a waitress became the queen of vampires and saved an entire kingdom with nothing but courage and kindness. If this story touched your heart, if you felt every emotion alongside Lyra and the Los, then please subscribe right now. Because tomorrow, I'm bringing you another unforgettable tale that'll make you believe in love, hope, and the power of choosing courage over fear. Tell me in the comments, what was your favorite moment? The bullet scene? The throne room confrontation? Lyra standing between kings? I want to know. Thank you for being part of this story family. See you tomorrow for another incredible journey. Until then, remember, even the longest night can learn to hold the dawn.